Good morning, everyone. Put on some video here so you guys can see me. There we go. Good morning. Hope everyone had a good 4th of July weekend, as well as could be expected under the circumstances. Got 10 o'clock here. So I'm going to start off today's presentation a little bit different for some of you who's been on some of our other webinars. So let me switch screens here real quick. And we're used to, there we go. Used to do these as lunch and learn type things where we're all live and hanging out with each other, but we still don't get to do that. So we're going to continue this webinar series, and we're going to work a little bit more, try to do this as a live interactive type of thing so you can get the best experience out of that. So this is what I'm going to do different just for a few minutes here. I talk about a report that I got back on the 5th of June, and this is from Evercore ISI. They are an analyst for stocks. This is not by no means a stock recommendation hour or anything like that, but I do think it's important to understand what the market thinks of, what's going on out there in the world. And, they're judging it by price targets and stock values and so forth. But there's some great little pieces out here, and I'm just going to read a couple of them that I have highlighted. The second one down, it says, in this report, we dive deeper into Azure and outline 5 reasons why we believe Azure is well positioned to close the gap and potentially overtake AWS as the public cloud king over the next 4 to 5 years. And then they have the 5 bullets, but the 2 I highlighted here. Demand for public cloud services is likely to surpass prior estimates post-COVID, as partners and surveys indicate that companies are looking to accelerate their shift into the cloud as part of their work from home strategy. Microsoft's ability to deliver a full suite from desktop to the IaaS layer is key as enterprises reimagine what a new normal is post-COVID. And that full suite, we already know it and we kind of think about it. I mean, it's everything from WVD to Office 365, Microsoft 365, Azure, all the other business intelligent tools, so forth. So that's what they mean by the complete suite. Under that says, while we continue to believe that the public cloud market is broad enough to support multiple winners over the long term, we believe that Azure's hybrid portfolio carries structural advantages that will allow continued growth. So then there's some more charts and all kinds of stuff. This was S&P 500 versus Microsoft and blah, blah, blah. And then I wanted to highlight this part here. So they're talking about, as a general rule of thumb, customers follow a certain chain in their cloud migration process. Lift and shift, optimize, consumption of various platform as a service management tools, and evaluating the analytics. We'll talk today a lot about lift and shift and some on optimize, but right underneath it, it says, we believe most customers are currently somewhere between step 1, which is lift and shift, and step 2, which is optimize. And we agree with that, and that's a lot of what we're going to do today. Last bullet there was 72% of the respondents that they surveyed felt that the remote working in response to COVID-19 has accelerated their organization's IT digital transformations. We've seen the same thing. It's a lot of folks that might have thought they were going to do it at the end of this year, or we're going to do it next year, are starting to accelerate those things right now. Last one, back up at the top. I didn't read the first one here, but this is an important bullet. It says, and they're talking about Microsoft, of course, the company's base of recurring revenue, 70%, and balance sheet of $71 billion in net cash is going to put Microsoft in an enviable position. So my big thing on that, this is what I tell people all the time, and they're, sometimes they're talking about, hey, I want to use this, maybe this local data center, private cloud, or I want to use this for that. And I say, look, if you're getting the same thing out of Microsoft that you need to run your business, and they've got $71 billion of cash in the bank with a B, they're not going anywhere. So that's, to me, that's a huge factor, and everything else that goes with the technologies that they are going to be around. So if anybody has any questions on that, fine. But like I said, right now it says price target. They moved it up to $215 a share on June 5th, and as of today, I'm looking at my phone right now, it's $212. So it's something that has been going up and to the right quite a bit, and for the reasons that they've outlined here. So I'll go back to our presentation here. All right, so My name is Jeff Rogers, and I'm the CEO of Big Green IT. We're a Tier 1 Cloud Microsoft Cloud partner. Today, I think we're going to go through, and if you were with us last week and some others, we found kind of this method, this way of presenting that is more of a panelist type discussion where it gives you guys a chance to ask questions. Once again, imitating that live event that we do in person quite often, or at least had done those. So if you have questions along the way, I'll address them, or at least I'll bring them up to the panelists. And it should be a spot on, I'm guessing, the right side of your screen where you can type in a question, and I'll get to some of those. In the meantime, I pre-prepared some questions so we could get started. And those are the ones I listed below here. Azure baseline, how do you get started? What is the migration planning and testing methodologies? What about post-migration? How is Azure priced? That's something that comes up every single time. That's not unique to this particular presentation, but it's very important. So I think, okay, so real quick, who's Big Green IT? We're headquartered in Rockland, California, which is outside of Sacramento, offices throughout California and Nevada. Like I said, we're a direct Tier 1 partner for Microsoft, also gold in all of the key platform technologies that Microsoft has. At the bottom, very quickly, and I'm not going to go through them all, but I just want to give you an idea of the size of customers we work with. So whoever the audience is, whether you're 50 users or 5,000 users, we work all the way across that, and different disciplines from healthcare to casinos. Jim Boy's Tacos, if you're around here in this area, or Makuni's are also customers of ours, things like that. So Azure migration is what we're going to talk about. I've got a few slides I'm just going to start off with. If you were with us last week, we did an Azure 101, and we're kind of moving up the stack, if you will, with these webinar series that we have. This is the second out of 4. There were a few slides that were basics that I'm going to go through real quick, and then we'll get into the panelists and the discussion. So what is Azure? I got 3 slides to go with it, but I will say one thing that it seems to resonate with a lot of people. For those of us that have been doing technology for a while, I see this Azure Evolution paralleling what we did with virtualization 10 and 15 years ago, where at first it was like, okay, let's try some test dev machines. I'm never going to virtualize my production servers. And then within a short amount of time, we were doing all that. I see the same thing with Azure. Some of it is, hey, we already believe that this is the way we want to go, and we're going to move our entire production into Azure. And then there's others that say, hey, let's just take this one, let's take this one, let's take this one. And it's a very similar thing. I think the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a very big push for this. It's already started over the last year, and we're going to go from there. So what is Azure? I like just to show the magnitude that Azure runs in 60 plus regions worldwide, 140 countries that have Azure data centers, Azure data regions. They are separated. We do have a couple of customers that have business in the EU, and their processing must be done there. So therefore, instead of picking data centers in the Western United States, Central United States, whatever it might be, they're able to pick data centers from Azure that are specific to and only in the EU, and there's quite a variety of them. When it comes to compliance, this slide is so busy, it's almost an eye chart to put it up here, and I'm not going to go through it all. But if you can think of a compliance that your business might be in, I mean, the simple ones are, HIPAA for healthcare, and there's other PCI and ISO compliance type of things. They're all across the board. They're all available from Microsoft in Azure. And at the bottom of the slide, it actually has the link to their trust center, and all the documentation, all the things you guys would need, anyone would need, is available there. I'll say at this point too, by the way, guys, slides will be sent to you, so you don't have to take screenshots or any of that. If you want to write down some notes that are pertinent to your business, you want to ask questions, by all means do. But the slides themselves, we'll put these all together for you and send them off sometime tomorrow in an email. Last one is just a quick, even this one, I thought about it when I looked at it again last night. There's so many elements to Azure. In fact, I won't even read to the slide. I'll just talk about the fact that you've got Azure. Azure runs, Office 365, if you're already using that, that's run on Azure. It is for your platforms, for your VMs. There's now business analytics. There's now, Windows Virtual Desktop runs in Azure. There's so many things that go with it, and it just continues to grow every day. In fact, when we put slides together for these type of events, sometimes they're obsolete, a week or two later, just because of how quickly things are moving along. I do have a couple of poll questions before we get into the panelists here. And if I can hit the right buttons here and bring that up, I'm going to, okay, so first one, and someone's gonna have to tell me if it's coming up on the screen because I can't tell. It should say, have you started a migration to Azure? And it's just yes or no, just kind of getting an idea of who's gone down that road or who's already started. Distributing poll, it says poll in progress. There we go. I'd imagine we're probably going to get about 50-50, but thank you for responding. It looks like we're kind of trending towards 60% yes have started and about 40% no. That seems to be about holding up. So that's good. That's kind of what we thought. We get some people that have started, they're in it, want to ask some questions, and people are just figuring this out to get going. Okay, so I'm going to close that one. And I think we have another poll. Let me look here. Have you started? Well, that looks like this. Have you started migration? Go ahead. It is the same one. Okay, so let's just go with the poll that we put together. That gives everybody a good idea. Like I said, about 60-40 have started. Not surprising, and I think we can just kind of move on from there. All right. So I'd like to introduce. Hang on, this goes up. Okay, I'd like to introduce my panelists here. We have Wade Walker. Wade Walker is our Director of Cloud Services, and we also have Mike Proctor. Wave, Mike. Mike Proctor is our COO and Vice President of Cloud Services. So I think we're about ready. You guys ready? Yes?
All right.
Good. All right, here we go. So I'm going to start with one of our prepared questions here. And it's at the beginning. Where do you start? Baseline assessment, where do you go from here? So I know we prepared a slide. I'll bring that up. I'm not sure. Wade, you want to take that one first?
Sure. Let's see, that slide comes up. There we go. Well, where do any of us start with almost anything? We kind of want to see how much it's going to cost. So whether we're buying a car, buying groceries, buying whatever it is, we kick the tires first and go, where am I going to start and how much is it going to cost? Microsoft has an Azure calculator. There's a link to the calculator at the end of this slide deck, and you can go there and get some rough estimates. We do caution using Azure calculator, not because it's bad or anything, it's great. The challenge is Azure doesn't come in like one size or large, medium, small. Azure includes everything. So your Azure calculator can get very complex very quickly because it includes all things Azure, which is a ton of stuff. So that's usually where we see most people start, and then we run the Azure calculator ourselves, and then we also have some internal tools from Microsoft to help refine some of our calculations for running services in Azure. But that's where we see most people start, and that's where we also help start with our customers and prospects. Hey, let's get a rough estimate about what this is going to cost, and then where we can kind of fine tune some things within the calculator to give a good projection for a monthly, annual, and so on and so forth on the costs. And then there are some services within Microsoft if you commit to buy something over a 1 year, 3 year period where you can have discounts. So we help our customers with that, and that's usually where, again, most people start. And then if we're looking at some sort of an assessment, a baseline assessment, like how do I know what to do next? One of the most popular tools that we use is a tool from Microsoft called Azure Migrate, which is something that Microsoft built internally and also put together with some, with some acquisitions. And Azure Migrate runs against your on-premise environment or other cloud environment and actually assesses your environment. Looks at your storage, your virtual machine, so on and so forth, databases, and can give you a baseline assessment and make some recommendations on what Azure services to use and what sizes. So it kind of works together in tandem with Azure Calculator to give you a more refined cost estimate and how some of these services can then be, or your VMs, your storage, so on and so forth, databases can be migrated into Azure, and then make some recommendations on how to do those migrations. So that's basically, in summary, where do we start, what's the cost, and then next is how do I get a baseline assessment, and then we recommend using Azure Migrate to do that. So Jeff, back to you.
Okay. I'll add on to this. We're going to talk a little bit about the Azure Calculator towards the end of this as well. My whole thing is, look, there's some things like when we do Office 365 where, here, I'll turn my camera back on, I guess. There's some things when we do things such as Office 365 where there's these certain set of tools you run, you get all this information about Active Directory, you know what objects can be moved, which ones work in the cloud that don't work in Exchange and all that. And Azure's a little bit different. I think what we've seen so far is that we go in initially, and like I said, on the Azure Calculator, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but at least somebody will say, hey, I've gone and here's what I'm spending today, whether it's renting it for somewhere else or if it's you're estimating what your on-premise costs are going to be. And this gives you a pretty quick, hey, at least we're in the ballpark to move forward and see if we should do this and start planning. I'll show an example of that later on. Okay, so let's see, I have another prepared question here. What about planning and testing? And Mike, I'm going to have you take that one. And I think we have a slide put together for that. Go ahead.
No problem. Okay, so there's a lot of information here in this slide, and so I'll just I'll run through it. Again, the details that are all here will probably help jog your memory to make sense of what we were talking about when you saw this initially. And I'm just going to use them as kind of placeholders to talk through this here. So when we're talking to a customer that's looking to migrate to Azure, they basically fall into two camps. We have customers that are like most small to medium-sized businesses where their organization is run on off-the-shelf software, packages that they can buy from vendors with no customizations, or maybe some customizations that they've had a third party do for them, but that's how they run their company. And that's the most common type of business we run into. Then, excuse me, there are other companies where obviously they have those off-the-shelf line of business applications, but they also have developers or maybe some outsourced developers that have written applications specifically for them. And that's there's other things in the cloud that make the cloud more interesting and more valuable to customers like that, which we'll touch on. But it's one of the first things we try to determine is where you fall into that bucket, which side of that fence you fall into. Excuse me again. So on the slide here, if we look at they're kind of hard to see, but the green letters, this talks about people that don't have any customer proprietary applications. Everything I'm going to talk about in this slide, if you don't have your own applications, then that's really what's going to matter to you. It's rehosting or replacing with SaaS. If you're writing your own applications or you have your own legacy applications that you maybe want to bring forward as you move to the cloud, then all of these different options are on the table. And the overall migration becomes a little more involved in the planning phase and also in actually the deployment of the migration. So starting over here on the left, rehosting is essentially a lift and shift. So this is the most common type of Azure migration or cloud migration, really. It's the easiest to do. It makes the most sense to companies and IT organizations because all the paradigms fit right within what they're used to doing. If you've got 5 or 6 servers or VMs or a combination of both that are running either in a local data center or in your back closet or wherever it may be, then you're going to essentially just copy those machines and those workloads directly up into the cloud, pretty much exactly the way that they are now. And we call that a lift and shift or rehosting. There are advantages to doing that. You can reduce your capital expenditures and replace it with an operating expense. You can free up space if you need space in your office for human beings or for other systems or whatnot. You can free up space that way. And if you do it right, a lot of times you can get a pretty quick return on investment in something like that. However, it's quick, it's easy, and it makes sense, but it doesn't really take advantage of everything that Azure has to offer. If you want to take advantage of what else Azure has to offer, then there are other things that we look at as part of the migration. The next one down the chart here would be refactoring. So this is one of those things where it makes a lot of sense if you would be looking at this if you have your own applications. And by refactoring your applications, you're going to be making some changes to the way that they're written. You could be taking an application that was compiled in .NET, an older version, and maybe you're going to be bringing it into a newer version that has more functionality available to it when you're refactoring. But it's not a big change. And usually what that happens along with part of that would be containerizing applications. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole entirely, but old legacy applications require DLLs and libraries and all other bits and parts to actually make that application work in Windows or work in Linux. And a container, just to oversimplify it, puts all that into one bundle that can run in the cloud natively. It doesn't need its own VM. It doesn't need its own version of Windows. It doesn't need any of that stuff. It's just a container that runs in VM. That's the most common type of refactoring that we talk about with our customers. The next more complicated way of doing it is re-architecting, and that's a lot more involved, and that's the kind of thing where in addition, you want more benefits and more advantages than just containerization. So you want to take advantage of Azure Functions or microservices or things like that, and you can look at completely rebuilding your applications or re-architecting them. They're kind of 6 of one, half dozen the other, re-architect and rebuild here. The lines get blurred because sometimes during the process, when you're looking at the application and trying to determine the difference between re-architecting or rebuilding, the lines will also get blurred in there. This is when we start looking at PaaS services, so platform as a service. The most common one that people know about in Azure is usually Azure SQL Managed Instance or Azure Database, where you can have database functionality that doesn't require standing up a SQL VM in Azure. A lot of people want to know more about how that works. I think we touch on that a little bit later in here. More complicated and more involved, but also potentially more efficient things that are available in Azure are the serverless functions like microservices. So you can actually write code that runs in Azure. Somebody has probably such what's called Azure the world's biggest computer, because you can write and run code directly on Azure without even containers or VMs to make that stuff work. There's a lot of advantages to doing things that way, but it also means you're really deep into your own applications, and you definitely have your own developers that make that stuff all work. And then last off to the right, this also applies to everybody that doesn't have their own developers, so we can wake back up now. Sometimes moving to the cloud doesn't mean finding a home for all of your legacy applications in the cloud directly. Frequently, it means finding a SaaS or software as a service-based product that is from another vendor. Could be from Microsoft, could be from somebody else, but maybe there is a SaaS product that would be a great replacement for the on-premise version or the on-premise workload that you have now. Maybe your accounting package is, it's QuickBooks now, and rather than build a server in QuickBooks, which we do all the time because it's such a common application, but rather than put a VM in Azure and run QuickBooks on it, maybe you want to go ahead and just move to Business Central, which is a fully hosted SaaS-based product, or even, who's the other one? There's a million of them. So maybe that is something you want to do instead. The most common thing we run into is taking your Exchange servers and just putting them on Office 365. It's actually less common now, not because it's a less common solution, but because so many people have already done it. But that's the most common example of taking legacy on-premise applications and moving them to the cloud, not by actually moving them, but by replacing them with a software as a service-based product. Pretty much covers everything on here.
Good. No, that's good. That actually hits back on that part that I started with on the Microsoft report that was there, where they talked about the number one was lift and shift and number two was modernization. And really, yes, we get involved in some much more complicated things than that, having to do with we have customers with e-commerce, with,
They were secretly attending our lunch and learns last year before they wrote that report, because
right. But the modernization part of it is something for everyone. So even if you are just lifting and shifting stuff over, there are things that we can do. And in fact, it's one of the next questions that we have from a participant here related to SQL as a service versus SQL, and I'll get to that one. But there's a whole bunch of things that happen, and even in those first two stages, which most people will be involved in, and then you start to mature down the line from there. Same thing we talked about with virtualization, right? First, we just virtualize this many servers that we know will do it well, and then all of a sudden, within a year, we're also virtualizing SQL, virtualizing everything. Same type of stuff is going to happen and is continuing with Azure. So let me go to, I believe, if I push the right buttons here. Yeah, participant questions. So I do have one here that's kind of dovetails into what you're saying. It says it has to do with SQL. Do you recommend using Microsoft SQL as a service offering? Have you run into compatibility problems with it? And how has the performance compared to, well, the person wrote here, compared to rolling your own SQL instances? I guess that's California. Yeah, we're in California, so you can roll your own SQL. So yeah, this is just what you started to talk to. So maybe Mike, you can take that. It's just kind of comparing instead of putting a SQL server and a VM up there in Azure, hey, what's the benefits or what's the right use case for doing it as a service instead?
Sure. Well, it's an in-depth question with my favorite answer of it depends. There's actually two different PaaS-based services that Azure uses just to offer up Microsoft SQL, as well as a bunch for MySQL and, oh gosh, MongoDB and a million other different open source database platforms as well. But there's the regular Azure SQL database is a very simple SQL database that runs in Azure, and you just buy the databases that you want. And it's priced based on the size and something called DTUs, which is a kind of a weird way to try to measure SQL performance. And it's not a full SQL replacement solution, but it does work well for customers that just need a place to put SQL data, or they need a SQL database for other applications to call, and they don't want to, or it doesn't make sense to pay for full SQL licensing. When you're looking at lifting and shifting VMs in Azure, the part of what we do is always a cost analysis, and some of the sticker shock that can come into play is when people are taking entire SQL servers and putting them up into Azure, especially if they're using pay-as-you-go or just kind of rented SQL licensing. It gets very expensive very quickly. The SQL licensing is far more expensive than Windows licensing, and often can outstrip the cost of the compute cycles itself that you're paying for in Azure. So if you don't have to stand up a whole SQL server and you just need a couple of databases to hit for what the other applications need to pull data from, then it can be great. We've got a couple of examples where customers have come to us because they had a third-party point-of-sale system. They wanted to do a bunch of reporting and analytics, but in order to do that, they had to store data from that point-of-sale system in a SQL database. 15 years ago, well, that's fine. There's one running in the back room. We'll just add a table there. Well, this is a more modern organization. They didn't have any SQL databases, so they came to us and said, okay, we need to install a SQL server for this one application. What's it going to cost? And we don't have a data center. We don't even have a server room here. We don't have domain controllers. We're all Windows 10. So what should we do? Let's put it in Azure. And it was going to be a couple $100 a month for a very, very small, low-powered, simple SQL server to do that. We wound up using a $14 a month SQL database, and it met all the requirements. There was nothing to back up. There was nothing to patch. There was no antivirus. There was none of that stuff, and it wound up meeting that need perfectly. That's an extreme example, and it only works in some cases, but it is something that's there. The other PaaS service that SQL has is SQL Managed Instance, which is a little newer. It's a little under 2 years old. I think it's been general availability for around a year or so. That one is a fully fledged SQL server in the cloud. It can get expensive, but it also comes with all knobs flipped and all the features turned on. High availability is built in. If anyone has ever built a high availability Microsoft SQL system before, that's not a minor feat, but that's just part of SQL Managed Instance. And they have something like 99.5 compatibility with any SQL application that was written to run on SQL 2016 or newer. There's some other specs that go along with it, but also they guarantee that once you have an application running in SQL Managed Instance, you're done. You're never going to have to rewrite that application, because part of that PaaS service is it will continue to function for as long as you leave the SQL database up there, even while Microsoft on the back end, they do the patching, they do the updating, they add new SQL features and functionality into the product. Your application just sits there and you don't have to make changes to it if you don't want to. So from a compatibility question standpoint, to get back to your question, on managed instance, the compatibility is much higher, but it's kind of expensive. On Azure SQL Database, there's a lot of things you can't do there, but it's a very simple, inexpensive service. And at the end of the day, we can always lift and shift a SQL Server into the cloud for you.
Yep, and I think that was a good overall discussion about how it all works. And there are other things like that. We didn't even touch upon web servers because the question was about SQL servers, but there's a whole bunch of other things. That's where you get in that line between lifting and shifting and modernizing and using services to drive down the costs and things like that as well. So if anybody has any further questions, be sure and type those in. We're going to try to cover as much as we can. We've got maybe another 20 minutes left here, but we're not going to be able to get to everything. And if there's some questions that are going to be a little more detailed, maybe we'll take those offline. But by all means, use this opportunity to ask some questions. I'm going to go to the next one that we have set, which is, the question here is, what happens post-migration? And there's a lot to that, but I think we're just going to try to simplify it. And I think we have one slide we put together for that. And Wade, you want to take that?
Here we go. Yes, thank you, Jeff. And did we lose your presentation?
Yes, because I clicked the wrong button. Here we go.
There we go. And this really hits on the slide Jeff presented at the beginning of this presentation from Evercore about the various phases of migration, lift and shift, some optimization. And then as we talked about in the last slide, Mike talked about moving things from a SQL Server virtual machine to SQL Server service. So post-migration are a whole bunch of activities, and it's almost like that continual service improvement or continual process improvement, where you're just always trying to make things better and better and better and improve what you got. Whoops.
That's all right.
That slide disappeared again. There we go. So at the top of the slide, we talk about migrate. And once you migrate your services, whether it's a virtual machine that we've brought over in a lift and shift, or we've moved to a platform as a service solution, so on and so forth, these next set of actions are fairly common. You don't always go in this particular order, but obviously security is a big issue. Securing services. Microsoft's got a nice tool called Azure Security Center, which does a security assessment of your environment and makes some recommendations. On the left there is under govern. A big one we get to right away is cost management. I hit on that in the earlier slide, is how much does this cost? Now post-migration, great, it's in there. Now how much is it really costing? So instead of our planning of Azure Calculator and we did our plan, now are we actually hitting our plan? Is it actually costing as much as we thought it is, or was it more, or was it less? And we use tools from Microsoft and third parties to help look at those costs, make some budgets, and make some assessments and get some alerts. And that's usually one of the first things also that happens is, yeah, once I need to secure my environment and I need to make sure my costs are in line. And then also when everything's in there and it's kind of running and you're at a steady state and your costs are making sense and you know everything's working the way you want it, and we start going, geez, can this get better? We'll use some of the monitoring tools there on the bottom to monitor and assess what's going on. How are the VMs performing? How's the databases performing? Do we need to resize a virtual machine, make it bigger? It needs to handle more resources, or can we lower it because it's not really being used that much and we're paying too much for it? Let's monitor, let's lower it a little bit, different smaller VM size, save some money. And then there's some quote unquote insight tools built into Azure that can help us dig even deeper into the services that are running in Azure and really make sure that it's working the way we expect it to, and everything's working well. And obviously there's going to be growth in your business or contraction, or you're moving this way, or you're acquiring company, and as you do that, your demands and needs are going to change. So this continuous cycle happens all the time for us and our customers on just monitoring our environment, making sure it's running the way it's supposed to run. And then there's a number of tools that we use, and we're going to hit on some of these tools in future webinars as well. So I'm not going to dig in too much into them now, but it's no different than your current data center that you might have in your office or at a co-location facility. You're always fine-tuning it. You're always making it better. Your business needs change. You grow. You add a new ERP system. You add a new SFA CRM system, whatever it is. And as we're doing that your environment is constantly being looked at with areas on how to improve it and improve the security of it. If you are in a regulated industry, Jeff hit on this earlier with that busy slide of all the compliance controls that are built into Azure. We might have to do some HIPAA assessments and help you configure things to meet your HIPAA requirements. You might have GDPR or CCPA and have to do things that are along those compliance requirements. So we help our customers with that and make sure everything's kind of hitting your needs, hitting your requirements and your audits. And then again, just going back up to the top, hey, now that we've hit this migrate and we're back again, this continuous process improvement, how can we improve it? Microsoft continues to add to Azure, so it's like the world's biggest computer, keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger with more and more services. And as that continues to happen, and as Mike mentioned with containers, and we already hit the SQL as a service, we're continually looking at our Azure environment for us and our customers going, gee, this looked really, really good. It makes sense to, yesterday, but now with these new features coming out from Microsoft, boy, oh boy, maybe we should move to these, containers, to these SQL Server managed instances, because it makes more sense for us, and it might oftentimes saves you money. And then when that happens, we then kind of migrate that current environment to one of these platform as a service solutions, and then go through this wheel again, not in necessarily sequential order, but then go through this wheel on these new platform as a service solutions, containers, whatever it is, to make sure that everything's running well and meeting your needs and completely optimized for you and your customers.
Yep.
So with that, Jeff, back to you.
Perfect. That's perfect, Wade. This is just like anything else. It's continual, right? I use this parallel to virtualization, and we would go through after we virtualize, a month later, 6 months later, and do some type of performance or optimization check on that and find out we've got, 30 orphan VMs that somebody set up, and we got to go through and clean all that up, or we found some other things. So same type of stuff. Post-migration, everything's working, the company's in production, everything's happening the way expected it to. But then we're continually trying to optimize that, both for costs and for utilization. So thanks for that, Wade. Let's see here. I've got, what I'm going to do? I do have a couple of more questions, but I think that we'll go kind of through this just to make sure we stay on time for everyone that needs to stay within the time frame we allotted for this. So I'm going to go ahead and save those to the end. I do want to go through this one. This one is, how is Azure licensed and priced? It doesn't matter how far into Azure you've gotten, it seems to change rapidly. And so this question comes up all the time, and I want to make sure that we hit on that. And Mike, I think we've got a couple of slides that I thought you might be able to talk to.
Sure, fire away.
Okay.
Okay. So I do want to actually get to the information that's on this slide, but as far as how Azure is priced, I'll go ahead and run down the quick part that everybody probably knows, just because it's the cloud. I talked about a lot of different PaaS, IaaS, and SaaS services. IaaS is the most common. That's infrastructure. That's where lift and shifts come in. That has very there's a lot of analogies and parallels to the way that your services are currently working now, and what you pay for. So you can buy compute, you can buy storage, and you just pay for it on a price per minute basis. That's kind of how people are familiar with what you buy in the cloud. The PaaS services are platform services. So essentially you're moving, you can think of it as kind of moving up the stack. You're not actually renting CPUs and memory cores directly or virtual machines anymore. You're actually getting something like a SQL platform or a WVD virtual desktop platform, something where that backend stuff is handled for you. The compute cycles and the memory and the Windows or Linux server operating system, that stuff is hidden from you, and it's just the platform itself you're buying. And then software service as a service, everybody knows about, because that's basically every cloud thing that, from Dropbox to YouTube to Voodoo to Netflix, those are all software as a service type of solutions, and that's completely up the stack. All you're paying for is the end product you're consuming, and you don't care about network or hardware or any. That's always somebody else's problem. So that's how the cloud in general is priced. But the unique stuff that we want to talk about with Azure and with Microsoft licensing, which is a whole nother thing, which I'm sure I'm going to get dragged into because I can never escape one of these without talking about Microsoft licensing. But there are things we can do in Azure to really help you save money that are unique. The first one here, starting on the left, is using your existing licenses. They have something called the Hub Hybrid Use Benefit. So if you're an organization that has Windows Server or SQL Server licensing, and you are paying for software assurance now, whether it was an open license or on an enterprise agreement or an MPSA or something along those lines, if you have software assurance, then when you rent or consume your Azure servers in the cloud, then you can, instead of having to rent the server license or SQL license all over again, you can reuse the licenses that you're already paying for on premise. And with some versions, like with Windows Server Standard, if you have a certain number of cores that are licensed on-prem, you can shift them up to the cloud and use them up there instead. If you have Windows Server DATACENTER version, then you can actually use them in both locations simultaneously. So you can have a number of cores on-prem and in the cloud and use them in both locations at the same time. Essentially, it's a way to, if you have enterprise, it's a way to kind of double your licensing footprint. And what that actually means is, if you break down the pricing on a VM in Azure, if a VM is $200, then probably 150 of that is for the compute and the memory. So your CPU and memory, it's the actual hardware bits. The other $50 or so is just Windows licensing. So if you look at the Linux price, since there's no cost directly for the Linux license, then even though you're running Windows on it, you're actually just paying for the Linux cost of that VM. Same with SQL. If you have a SQL license, you can move up there. You're just going to pay for the cost of a bare Linux virtual machine without SQL on it. If you have both, then it's bare Linux, no Windows licensing, no SQL licensing. The other thing you can take advantage of are reserved instances. It says here reserve upfront and pay less, and that's important, because just because you're reserving your virtual machine instance upfront doesn't mean you're paying for it upfront, because in Azure you can get the upfront pricing but still pay monthly, and that's available in 1 year or 3 year chunks. And again, you can pay for it monthly. You just have to make the commitment that you're going to keep that server or something very similar to it up for 1 year, 3 years, and then you get the massive 30+% cost savings. There are very little limitations, or very few limitations, on being able to change those reserved instances. So you're not buying it, you're not stuck with it. I know Amazon AWS has had their own version of reserved instances for years and years, but it was always a big gamble, because once you bought them, you owned them, period, and you paid for them up front, and you were stuck with them. They went out of their way to even set up a third-party, well, Amazon ran it, but they had their own marketplace where you could try to eBay off your reserved instances to somebody else to buy them off you, because you were stuck with them once you bought them, and somebody had to pay for them. On Azure, online in the Azure portal. Of course, we do it for you, but even if you didn't want to use us, you can just go onto the Azure portal and trade that reserved instance in for another one, or even give it back entirely with a very small penalty, like 12% or something. So reserved instances in Azure is a huge way to save a lot of money, and it's one of the things that we do at the end of a migration is run through your environment and say, okay, what services are we definitely going to keep around? Let's go ahead and lock those in as reserved instances and really dial up the savings there. The last piece of this slide is extended service or extended security updates, which you get for free. So Windows 7 and the 2008 versions of Windows and SQL Server are end of life, no longer in support. A lot of people don't use Microsoft support for that anyway, but back on security and compliance requirements, you don't pass audits if you're running software that is out of support. So Microsoft is doing is if you migrate your 2008 workloads or your Windows 7 workloads on WVD up into Azure, they give you 3 years of extended security updates, which means it's back under support, and they give you that for free. So if you have legacy applications that you haven't been able to get to run or haven't tried to get to run on current versions of the server operating system or desktop operating system or SQL, just by moving them into Azure, you automatically get that stuff back into support. And that is another thing you can only do in Azure. So those are 3 ways that you can actually make it a lot more cost effective than simply looking at the price of what does it cost here and what does it cost on the ground.
Well, if people have more questions about this specifically, we are going to have, I think it's in 2 weeks. I got to look at the schedule in a minute, but one webinar specifically on cost optimization. So I've got here, Mike, I'm not sure if you might want to talk to this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure, real quick. So if anybody has people have all probably gotten emails from companies that are in business specifically to tell you how to manage your cloud cost. And a lot of this is based on large organizations that threw all their money into AWS or threw all their services into AWS 4 or 5 years ago because it was great and easy and we could just turn the knobs and instantly have more capacity. And then, that was all started on somebody's credit card. Fast forward a year, and now they've got a $90,000 a month cloud bill, and they have no idea what they've got or where it is or why it costs this much, and they're afraid to turn anything off because they don't want to take things down. And so all these cost management companies popped up for helping you manage what you're spending in the cloud. This is just a simple screenshot here, but Azure Cost Management is actually built in for free, included in the portal. They actually bought a company called Cloud9 about 2-3 years ago that was one of those third-party products that was specifically brought up to manage your AWS costs. They bought that company and they've since completed fully rolling the capabilities into the portal. It does a pretty good job for almost all of our customers. We do partner with a company called Flexera that is probably the biggest and the best and the well-known of the people that can really get a handle on your entire Azure, all of your Azure real estate, basically everything you've got. If you've got a huge environment and lots of different cost centers you want to split out for billing and whatnot, and do some other things in that arena, we partner with them for the really, really big stuff. But most of my customers now, you can run this, just use the Azure Cost Management built into the portal, and it gives you everything you need to keep an eye on things. There's reports and alerts, and if somebody's just spinning up VMs willy-nilly and you need to know about it before you get a bill, this is the place you can do that.
Perfect. That's a good example of that. The last part on pricing, Mike, I think is just kind of sources of billing or sources of acquiring the licenses and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I knew it. See, it can never get away from the slide. So
it follows you everywhere.
Yeah.
No.
Microsoft licensing is its own animal, but it's an animal we feel like we've tamed pretty well, and we do want to talk about it. I didn't spend all this time figuring this stuff out over the past 10 years just to not do something with it. Bundles and a la carte, that's really targeted towards the Microsoft and Office 365 licensing. We're specialists in that. We know all about it for sure. If you're a 365 customer and using nameless CDW or something for that, or putting it on a credit card with Microsoft directly, you should definitely talk to us about letting us handle it for you. We can probably save you a bunch of money. Open volume agreements, enterprise agreements, EA to MPSA. This is all these acronyms are things that anyone that's ever had to sign a Microsoft contract has dealt with. We can help you with all of that. We can help you migrate your software assurance benefits, like the hybrid use benefit. That is a software assurance benefit. That we have ways to get that from one type of contract agreement to another without losing it. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. Whoever has to pay your contracts in your company, they do, and we can help with that. There's special pricing for nonprofit and government education that's available from Microsoft on all of that stuff. Cloud service, that's what we are, is we're a cloud service provider. So a lot of these licensing, we can actually handle for you directly in minutes and just get it up and running through our self-service portal, or just give us a call. We can do all that stuff right away for you. And then software asset management, that is a product or a service that we offer for companies that have really, again, large estates with tons of different applications, and they're not sure how many users they've got, and maybe they're afraid of getting the Microsoft police coming after them for an audit, or maybe it's happened in the past and you want to be prepared. We can handle those projects as well. The takeaway is that all of the Microsoft licensing, you should definitely get in touch with us and let us help you sort that out.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mike. I'm gonna, for the sake of time here, I'm going to leave any questions to the end, so it's not specific to that. So let's just, this is kind of more towards that wrap up part of it. I realize what time it is, and hopefully all of this information is being very helpful for everyone that's on listening today. Kind of a next step thing, this is our slide to say, hey, we can help you out. We do a complete free Big Green IT Azure migration assessment. And basically it is the Azure calculator. And what we do is we'll run it on your behalf and consolidate all the information, provide some analysis, and actually a live meeting to review the results. The idea there is to get past that first step of going, okay, if I want to go down this road, what in general, what do you think this thing's going to cost? We've got some notes on here about who to get in touch with, so that way when you get a copy of the slides, you'll be able to do that. I have a sample. This is not from the Azure calculator. This is actually what we put together, and this is a real report for one of our customers we ran about 6 or 7 months ago. Took into account all of the different VMs. There's actually a few more to this as well, but you can see kind of at the top, underneath where it says Azure cost in the heading, it says total Azure monthly recurring revenue. So we estimated it would be, based on this calculator, about $16,000 a month for them to run their entire environment. It came out to be around 13 to 14,000, which is what we would expect now that it's been lifted and shifted, it's been moved, and now we can do some of those optimizations. I do have some slides I won't bother you with now, but kind of shows here were their web servers that we were able to consolidate into services, so they didn't have to have a server anymore. Same thing with SQL, and then reserved instances and everything kind of brings that bill down. This is a great place to start, and this is what we'll run for you guys if you have some interest in that. So this is kind of just on the right side. This is just other things, ways to get a hold of us and stuff about the things that Big Green IT participates in that is beneficial to our customers. We do part of a data center optimization program, which gives us direct, I call it the backbone, but level 3, level 4 support engineering right away. Same thing with our Microsoft Premier support. It's their kind of high-end program that we have to pay into, but it gives us and our customers access to the highest levels there. One note, it's still happening above that where it says COVID-19. If you are an Office 365 and Microsoft 365 user right now, we're kind of giving you a 1 month relief in cost if you move your Office 365 M365 over to Big Green IT. So I'm looking here for some other questions. I'm wondering time-wise, I think that I'm going to go right through the last few parts of it here, and I just want to keep it within a reasonable amount for this. So here's some additional resources. Once again, you'll get the slides. These are the way you can connect to some of the things we talked about, the Security Center and the calculators and so forth. We do have some upcoming webinars in addition to this. This is a series of 4. And the next one you can see is managing and optimizing your costs. That's on July 22nd. And then the next one, 2 weeks after that, is security and compliance. And those two alone are probably the biggest discussion points that we have, other than when we get into an engagement and get deep into the planning sessions. But these are the first two, so we made those additional webinars. So the last one is a thank you screen. So Mike or Wade, do you have any other kind of final comments? And
I don't know. We kind of got 5 minutes left. Does anybody?
My thing is like between this and the next two webinars, we've started this webinar series to talk about all things Azure.
Yes.
And now at the end here, we're starting to tie things together, kind of put a pretty little bow on top of how to migrate. And then once you're there, how to optimize your costs, optimize your resources, maybe move into platform as a service solutions, and then also focus on security and compliance requirements. And there's going to be a lot of overlap between these next two webinars, as some of the tools do some of the same analysis and point out optimizations and high performance recommendations and security recommendations and cost recommendations. So these next two webinars are going to be a great way to tie all this, the whole series together at the end.
That's perfect. Yeah, the other parts that I get questions about, and there's a couple of things in here about firewalls, about Active Directory. And if you have any more questions, you've got all of our contact information. By all means, send those to us. We'd be glad to answer those, and join us for our next two webinars. If, by the way, you did sign up for the series, you may want to double check on the dates and make sure they're on your calendar, because go to webinar and go to meeting when you put on an entire series, don't always send those out calendar invites. So just check and make sure those are on if you want to join us for those as well. All right, with that, I'd like to, thank everybody for being on the webinar today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on a future webinar as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.